This podcast is a casual conversation about mental health. All topics discussed are based on our own personal opinions and should not be interpreted as professional advice. If you need assistance with your mental health, please contact a healthcare provider.
I'm overstimulated, expect the long-awaited abolition of my brain.
But if mentally we synchronize, despite what we despise, there's a chance that maybe I won't go insane. Hi, friends!
Hey, hi!
Welcome to Mental Sync!
Mental Sync!
The only show where we admit that we're toxic and try to fix it sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
We're getting better.
Yeah, we'll get better.
Yeah. The only show where I'm a psychopath.
The only... So far. You haven't started your rock podcast yet.
Oh, yes. I can't wait for that podcast. That's literally, I'm going to talk about rocks.
Yeah.
And it's going to be so interesting.
I'm going to demand to be a part of it in every sense because I'm toxic and can't leave you alone.
Yes. Yes. I know. You're just like, you're so clingy, John.
Yeah. No, we have this thing, Emily and I, in our relationship where I will constantly shame her and get upset with her for not spending every waking moment speaking to me, talking to me, spending time with me, despite being an entire several cities away.
Yes, and then in turn, I take that and internalize it and then admit that I'm just a terrible friend. So then I don't talk to John when he wants me to talk to him for like 7 years. Mm-hmm. And then right when he's about to not be my friend anymore, I just reel him back in.
Yeah. Yeah. All the while, I'm actually well aware that I could just be the one to reach out, but I feel it's more productive for me to just put the blame on Emily and not do any of the work to solve the problems myself.
Yes.
Because I don't like to hold myself accountable.
Same.
Yeah.
Yep. So John and I really don't have like a healthy relationship. We just pretend we do for the podcast.
It's all facade.
It really
is. It's all social media nonsense.
It really is. And okay, so like, if you couldn't tell, we're going to talk about toxic relationships for this episode.
That's what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so we're just going to model it off of John's relationship with me, and then, like, it's going to be great. But anyway.
I thought you were just going to go, yeah, so we're just going to model it off of John's general consistent toxic patterns.
Well, so I have a lot of thoughts about this episode. Because
give me your thoughts on this episode.
Well, there's a lot of things going through my mind at the moment, and I would like to admit that I have been a toxic friend, and I feel like that's like a hard thing to like admit to. But I'm proud of myself that I'm sitting here telling, you know, all the people who listen to this plus our one France listener that I have totally been a toxic friend, and I didn't realize it at the time. Like I was going through some stuff, like mental health wise, and I just, like, didn't... I guess I could say that I didn't, like, know really what I was doing. Like, I knew what I was doing, but I couldn't help myself almost, you know? Like, because I was just, like, really struggling. But the reason I bring all that up is because it's, like, I think we all go through phases of, like, kind of being toxic without realizing we're being toxic. And, like, I don't know. It's, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so, like, despite our entire opening being about our awareness of what makes up a toxic relationship, none of those components actually pertain to our relationship, and we this point in our lives are very, very good about you know, other than like before this podcast, our relationship, you know, we were super, super close in high school, but then even in high school we would sometimes just go weeks where we'd just be busy. We weren't really in the same like social circles. Which is why it was interesting that we were such good friends, because I wouldn't say a lot of our friends really like intersected. Like I was friends, like I liked everyone you were friends with, and I think you liked everyone I was friends with, maybe for the most part at least. But
how did we meet?
We met in classes. Like we kept ending up having classes together. So we met in civics with
Mr. Curtis.
Yeah.
Did we?
That's when we had met.
No, was that freshman year? That would have had to be freshman year.
Yeah, that was freshman year. Yeah, no, that's when we met. And that's the thing, is our friendship kind of, like, we would sometimes, like, our friends would intersect.
Yeah, you were,
but
like,
not all the time. The further we went into high school.
The difference between John and I was he was a huge, like, drama club kid, and I was like,
theater dork.
I can't, like, associate with those kind of people, though I was also in orchestra.
Yeah, well, you had to protect your image.
I did. I had to be the orchestra geek, that, like, didn't talk to the theater kids, because that was, like, a no-go.
And I couldn't go anywhere near a string instrument other than a guitar. For the sake of my image.
I don't know how to play guitar, so.
And you don't know how to play guitar. I think we've told this story on the podcast.
That was, I think, like, our first fight that we got into, because you really hurt my feelings for, like, no reason.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, it wasn't for no reason.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's get into it. Okay, listen. So what happened from my point of view of the story?
Honestly, I don't even remember what happened other than, like, the moment of me being, like, really kind of hurt by the way that you said something, and then, like, telling you that you hurt my feelings, like, later. That's all I remember. So I'd love to hear what actually happened, because I can't remember for the life of me.
I mean, this also isn't necessarily what actually happened. This is from ultimately what it came down to was me being forgetful and stupid, and, like, I'll say a little neglectful, but I was going through a phase of my guitar being my identity, and I was definitely trying to take on this image as, like, guitar kid a little bit, just, trying to forge my own sense of identity. And I started bringing my guitar into school a lot, because I would, like, play with people after school, and then I would start, like, we would hang out in the mornings sometimes, which is where I kind of remember this happening.
I remember this happening like, in a classroom, like, outside of your locker.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. But we somewhere, but
in my memory, the classroom was, like, kind of dark. I don't know why. Dark classroom.
I think that's just your memory. I think that's just. Yeah, and I'm remembering the classroom was really dark, and I was surrounded by all the most judgmental people in my life. But it was all of their faces on several of your bodies. I don't remember. But basically, from what I remember, and it's hard to remember because I was completely unaware at the time until you brought it up to me afterwards. But you had mentioned something about, like, oh, could I play your guitar? And I was like, oh, you play guitar?
Okay, so I don't remember it that way.
It was something like that. But, like again, that's my side of the story, because what you've brought up to me since then is that we had several conversations about you.
Like, I taught myself how to play guitar.
And, and I just wiped that from my memory. And I felt terrible about it, because I was like, yeah, in retrospect, I mean, because we weren't best friends at that point.
Right.
Like, we were still getting to know each other, but it was just such a neglectful, like, it was, I think, a little bit of a self-absorbed thing of, like, feeling like the guitar kid and not really, I don't know, maybe, like, not really acknowledging that you also played an instrument. I don't really remember. But,
so what I remember, and again, we're probably both wrong, like, and plus, like,
the truth is somewhere in the middle.
I feel like at that age, everything is so, like, more severe than it actually was.
Hormonally driven.
Mm-hmm. So I remember asking to play your guitar, because I wanted to show you that I had, like, taught myself something. Like, I like, remember that. And obviously I remember you being like, oh, you play guitar? But I remember you saying it in a way that was kind of, like, rude. Like, it was, like, off-putting to me, the way you responded.
No, I'm sure it was.
And that's why it hurt my feelings so much, too. Like, on top of us talking... Oh, I hit my mic.
No, I'm sure it was a very, like...
Like, I remember talking to you about it and being
14, 15-year-old mansplaining way of, like, do you want me to show you something? Do you want me to... No, genuinely, I'm sure that's what it was.
Well, I remember, too, like, us... Because I was, like... trying, because you knew how to play guitar in my eyes, right? Like, I was like, oh, like, John will know if this sounds good. Like, it was more so me going to you to, like, looking for, like, can I do this, like, that kind of a thing, you know what I mean? And so when I asked you and all of this happened, we had previously had conversations about like how I was teaching myself how to play guitar and I wanted like feedback on it. So when you said that, I was like, really? So you don't fucking listen to me, John? Like, it was like kind of like butthurt.
Honestly, I'm sure that's what it was. I was in such an angsty phase. Oh God, that's like a whole nother podcast episode.
I feel like we also like we really haven't gotten into many like fights per se, like, or like disagreements.
I don't think other than like taste in movies, I don't think
that's a whole other podcast.
I don't think we've ever had like since our friendship has become what it is, which I would say was probably like late freshman year to like sophomore year of high school, and then I disappeared for half a year.
Yeah, John almost died.
I was having horrible migraines, and I couldn't.
And my heart was broken every day.
To school, and so I left Emily all alone for like 6 months of high school.
It was so upsetting.
It was really uncool of me.
Like left me all alone in Mr. Maratska's class, my bio class.
I did, yeah.
And I had to. That's when I should have known that I had ADHD. Because I wouldn't do those packets. I'm not kidding. Like, I think back when I was, like, going through my ADHD testing, they were like, oh, so, like, were you like this in school? And I kid you not, I think back to, like, doing these packets for Mr. Remember, his way of teaching was, here's a 30-page packet that you have to, like, fill out. And then he just made sure you, like, completed it type of a thing. And that, to me, was just so boring. So I, like, wouldn't do it.
Not it.
And then he'd be like, listen, kid, if you can get this done by next week, I'd give you credit. So that's the only reason I passed that class. But I should have known in that moment that something was going on with my brain, but I didn't. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, getting back into things going on in brains, it's really interesting looking back on this one initial fight that we had in our friendship, because it honestly is very telling of how I was a toxic person. This is something that I mean, okay, another thing I want to say, I think it's unfair to say, like, I was a toxic person versus, and like, you were a toxic person. I think there's a real problem about looking at toxicity as a binary thing of, oh, were you a toxic person or not a toxic person? Because that's not really how it works. There's a great quote from BoJack Horseman, actually, which is a lot about toxicity and the patterns of trauma and, big wreck. But Diane at one point said, you know, BoJack says, like, you think I'm a good person, right? And she's like, well, I don't really think there are good people or bad people. I think it's something like, she says, like, I think it's, the decisions we make and the actions that we take that define us.
Yeah.
And I love that quote.
Wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, because it's a really great show.
The other thing, too, that I want to mention just about our relationship is I feel like, I don't know, like, you've always been a constant. Like, even when we don't talk, like, I always know that, like, if I were, like, dying, I know you'd be probably one of the first people there. Like I've always felt that way, even, like, in high school, and I feel like I feel
exactly the same way.
We became really close, like, within that year. Like, within a couple months, actually. Like, I was like, yep, this is John, this is my best friend. Like, we're gonna call it, like, call it a day. And then the only other time, well, okay, first, I'd like to say that I was upset. I think I remember being mad at you for, like, a couple of days until finally you were like, what's the matter? Because you didn't, like, I was, like, treating you differently, and then that's when I told you what you did that, like, hurt my feelings. And then we just, like, talked about it and resolved it.
Yeah. And so you know what else, too? Because this was freshman year of high school, and if I may speak to how boys often are, other than just generally being the worst, I think that, because that was, like, the step into our friendship becoming a solidified friendship.
It was.
And I think part of my insecurities, I remember at the very, very beginning of our friendship, like, from, like, when we met to probably around that point, was the insecurity of, like, I'm a boy friends with a girl. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Is that gonna be anything? And I knew I didn't, like, really, like, want that, just because we've never had that vibe.
Right.
But we hadn't been close enough to know. I didn't know how you felt about that. I don't know if you knew how I felt about that. And
I don't think I did. Like, I don't think, and I think from my perspective, like, you always have that thought in high school, right? Because, like, even when I was friends with, like, Eddie, right?
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
yeah, like it was like this weird, people would be like, well, you're always together. And it's like, well, so I can't be friends with him.
And
like,
you're a boy and you're a girl, so what else could that mean? And that's just...
And I get that. Yeah. And it was funny because what I was going to bring up, the only other time that and this wasn't intentional by you at all, the only other time that I was butthurt by you, and
tell me.
It's only my own personal thing. It has nothing to do with you.
Tell me.
It literally, wait, no, because I have to preface this the right way, because of this whole conversation that we're having now about like being in high school and having like feelings for someone that's like, you know, which wasn't the case, but people took it the wrong way. Because remember, I was like, if we get to prom and we don't have dates, like, will you go to prom with me? Do you remember that conversation?
Oh, God, I don't.
And then
actually.
You don't remember that? Okay,
wait,
so...
Oh, no.
Wait, you'll remember in a minute. Hold on.
Okay,
so we had this conversation because you were actively remembering this, too. Like, in the moment, we were having, like, this was fine. This was an agreement. Like, you knew.
No, I do. I do remember this. I remember this. Oh, my God.
It was, like, a week before prom, and you were like... Or it was, like, 2 weeks or something like that. And you were like, oh, by the way, I have a girlfriend now. And I was so butthurt because I was like, well, who am I going to go to prom with? Like... And this was like junior year of high school. And I wasn't mad at you per se, but I was like, I like really wanted to go with John because John's my friend and I'm comfortable with John and I don't want to go alone. And like, there was like that whole thing. And then I told somebody like my feelings about that. And then it was this whole like, well, do you have feelings for John? And I was like, no, I just like, it was just like this whole thing where I was like looking forward to it was going to be fun and whatever.
No, I do remember that because I had started dating my first very serious girlfriend my junior year of college.
Of high school.
Yes. Fuck. Of high school. She was in freshman year of college. I was a junior in high school. And it was my first like... Very and I just remembered relationship.
Too, the other reason this hurt so much is because I just broke up with my first. Yep. Because it was like it like just happened.
Because
like,
and right? it was like a right before prom, like asking people to prom season, where you were in a relationship, I wasn't, and then that switched at the who are we going to prom with, and you were like, well, I'm not with my boyfriend anymore, so now, and I was like, I'm with my girlfriend.
I was so upset. But it had nothing to do with you, like, in your decisions. It was just like one of those moments where I was like, this is the only other moment I was like butthurt about something like in our relationship like that. But other than that, those are the only 2 times I feel like I've ever had been like, you know, like towards you. No, but going back to what I was saying about you know, not being so binary about like, are you a toxic person versus a non-toxic person? I definitely, like, we've all had like toxic traits. I don't like to say like, oh, I was a toxic person, because I think that implies that I am no longer a toxic person, which kind of just implies like, I'm all done growing. No, not the case. I had some very particular and very potent toxic traits that I feel like I've done a very good job of working through. And now I have other toxic traits and we all have little toxic traits because we're all human beings. Yeah.
I think if you feel like you're done working through them, look a little deeper, dig a little deeper. You know, you can always grow. The point being, one of my big things that I know was a case and wasn't something that was actually like, not to say no one told me about this, but it wasn't something that I started becoming aware of. Just the way that I wouldn't listen super often. And, you know, you can chalk it up to all these different things. Part of it being ADHD. Part of it being methods of communication that I had learned that I now have looked back at and realized, you know, a lot of the ways that I communicate with, like, my family are, oh, you have to, like, get a word in, like, and like, I definitely, you know, developed these patterns of trying to dominate the conversation as a means of like, I need to be heard. But when that, you know, when that's then put in front of people who don't communicate in the same way, it can be really discouraging. I mean, it's a toxic thing regardless. And so it's something that I really had to work through. And so that instance, like, genuinely, unfortunately, we had conversations about you telling me that you play guitar. And I'd love to say like, oh, I just forgot and whatever. I probably wasn't listening that hard. I'm like, it sucks to say, but I probably was just a little too self-absorbed to like think that it mattered, and that sucks. And that's something that I'm and it's something, when I became aware that that's something I was doing, it like, there's that first initial phase of becoming incredibly defensive and trying to be like, well, here are all the reasons, here are all the, like, it's not that I don't care, because that's what you jump to, is like, no, it's not that I don't care. It's not, I know I'm not a bad person. Therefore it can't be these, it's not this binary thing where I am a bad person and I don't listen. Therefore there's just more misunderstanding. It's just something that I had to work through. And I think something that I do want to talk about today is the cycle of that, and how another thing that BoJack gets into very well is how trauma affects everyone, and not even just trauma, but everyone acts a certain way for a reason. Everyone is the way they are for a reason. Sorry, I keep burping through this. Everyone does. Everyone's personality, the way everyone acts, it can all be traced back to not, I don't mean to say like excuses, but really it can be traced back and give an explanation. But that doesn't mean it's all okay. Right. Any behavior can be sympathetic if you trace it back far enough. But yes, it's just something to work on.
So, and I've talked about, so the reason why I was kind of excited to do this episode was because I think even up until the point when you're like, let's talk about toxic relationships, I was like, ooh, I have a lot of like things I can talk about, like that other people have done to me that have been toxic. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, I rather reflect on how I've been somebody who's been toxic, because I feel like, so I've talked about like a friend of mine that like ended up ghosting me and all this other stuff, and like how that kind of sucked and whatever. But and I admit it now to people when I tell people the story, because like it really does affect me, because there's a lot to break down during that time frame in my life, just because of what I was going through personally, medically, just like there's a lot going on for me. But I've never, I would like to address it in a way where I'm admitting my faults as well. And I have admitted my faults in previous ways, like when I've been talking about it, or even in that other episode we did, I did admit my faults to it, because I was putting a lot on this person. But I'd like to just bring this up again, because part of me, in a way, I hope he listens to the podcast. I hope he does. I don't think he does, but I hope he does, because I can't communicate with him anymore, right? Like, and I don't try, because I don't want to be like forcing myself into somebody's life if they don't want me there. Like, that's not the vibe. But he also doesn't know how much I've reflected on what's gone on, and not that I would like a relationship with him again in that sense, like where we're friends and it's like everything's fine, but I would have loved to have a chance to explain myself, because I think when you're going through a toxic relationship with someone and the other person's not doing it because they're like a narcissist, right? Like, I wasn't doing it because I'm some narcissistic asshole who like, is like this. I was struggling with my own things and basically taking it out on him. And I've always just wanted the chance to be like, I'm sorry, right? Like, I'm sorry for like what I was doing to you, because it wasn't fair to you. And at the same time, it also wasn't fair to myself. So in a sense, I was being a toxic friend to him, but I was also being toxic to myself, because I wasn't allowing myself the space and the time to think about why I was feeling the way I was feeling about what was kind of like going on. And I realize now how toxic it was for him, and like, even for me, yes, I'm not putting all the blame on me, because there's definitely some things that he's done too that like suck, but it was also like in reaction to me. So, I don't want to put the whole blame on myself, because again, like, I'm also human, and I give myself a little bit of compassion for what I was going through. And I just, it's such a hard situation when you're in something like that, because I have nothing but love and care for this person, even still to this day. but I think the more I reflect on it, the more I realize like how fucked up the whole thing was. And I think that's why I wanted to, like, I was excited to talk about this, because I was like, no, I want to talk about how I was like really emotionally clingy, like really kind of like trying to hog his time for my own, like, almost selfish reasons in a sense. I was like, I didn't want to be alone, but I almost put that on him, like, you're responsible for me not wanting to be alone, because he took on the role of caring. And that's fine, but I wouldn't let him have the boundaries he was trying to set because I was insecure. And again, I wasn't doing this because I do this. This was me having a mental breakdown about my own medical shit that I was going through, on top of like me learning that I have some mental health stuff. Like, I do have anxiety and depression, and I was just starting medication for it, and I was like learning a lot about myself in that time. And the easiest way for me to, I don't want to say process it, because I wasn't processing it, I guess dealing with it, was to put it on someone else. And I literally put it all on him and just expected that to be okay. And then in turn expected more from him because of that. Like, well, this is shitty for me, you have to be here for me. And I still have like some mutual friends with him. And a while ago, a couple years ago, I said to one of them, I was like, I just wish he had the chance to know me now, because I'm a different person.
Yeah.
So that I can apologize.
You want to show that growth. You want to show.
And I don't want him to think that I want to be friends with him, but I just want him to hear me out and be like, I'm sorry, and I know I was wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't even expect to reply. Like, I just want to be able to like be like, here, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for being this toxic person. I'm sorry for the stress that I caused you. Like I'm so sorry. I really truly am. So I, like, again, I think this adds to your point too, because it wasn't out of a place of like, you know, like, I wasn't trying to be malicious. I wasn't trying to be like this controlling
of course not.
person. And I think that that's what's hard to delineate when you're the person who's kind of being the victim in that situation. Like, if you're the victim of someone else's toxicity, I think it's hard sometimes to realize that there are some people who do it out of like malice, but then there's other people who are just struggling with their own internal stuff and don't realize what they're doing. And that sucks. Yeah. Because I've been the person, obviously, who didn't realize in the moment what I was doing until it was all said and done. I was like, fuck, dude, that sucks. Like, and I'm sorry. So
yeah, and listen, it's all spectrum. Everything's a spectrum. Yeah. But that's what's really tough, is there's a difference. There is a difference between isolated toxic behavior and toxic patterns. Right. And, you know, all of it's bad. Toxic behavior of any kind is bad. But I feel like most toxic behavior, well, maybe that's an overstatement, but a lot of toxic behavior you can pinpoint, if were you to, you know, look into like what is the cause of this person's toxic behavior. A lot of it can come down to individual experience and, you know, what that person was going through that day. You know, when it comes to like strangers being a certain way around you, it's probably because of the day they've been having. You know, that's an oversimplification, but right. I think in terms of like looking for red flags, right. And terms of like,
before you continue, I just want to say really quickly that like, yeah, I don't mean to like excuse my behavior in any way. And also,
no, that's not what you're doing.
I also don't think that people should be like 100% of the time be like, oh, maybe they're just having a bad day. Because again, if it's like toxic behavior that continues, like you should probably like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. Because that's the difference between toxic behavior versus toxic patterns. If you're starting a relationship with someone, romantic or friendship or, you know, whatever, a working relationship with someone, and you see little instances of that toxic behavior, it's good to get ahead of it. It's good, you know, it all comes down to communication. And if you're the person, this is hard to word, if you're the person putting out that toxic behavior,
I think what's important for you to realize is, like, yeah, like, it can all be traced back to something. It can all be explained because everyone is the way they are for a reason. However, like, none of it's excusable. However, when it's a real problem is when it's a pattern.
Right.
When it's a pattern and you're saying, like, when it becomes part of your identity of, oh, this is something I do. Or when you're looking at someone like, oh, this is something they do. When it becomes a pattern, and it's tough and it's unfair, but it is the responsibility of that person who has had that whatever trauma, whatever life experience put on them that is turning them into a person that, as a pattern, puts others down, as a pattern takes advantage of others, as a pattern, even if it's not malicious. Like, right. It doesn't even have to be like this big malicious thing, but if it's a pattern, it is your responsibility to break out of it, to stop that cycle. And that's not fair. It's not fair that you have that responsibility put on you, but that's
right. Well,
it comes down to how much do you let what has happened to you affect other people, because that to me is when it stops becoming in any way sympathetic. Once it starts affecting other people, it's no longer your trauma, it's now their trauma too.
Well, you know, if anybody who's listening hasn't listened to the podcast with John's sibling Liv on it, please go listen, because Liv said something that I could relate to, like, wholeheartedly. Liv was talking about the different things that, like, the different signs do in communication, and they were giving advice for, like, here's what you can do if you are this type of a person. You know, you know what I'm saying? Remember that part?
Yeah. I remember that. I was there. Yeah.
Yeah, remember that? So, one of the things, like, one of the points that we all brought up about, like, water signs is just kind of, like, being super emotional and, like, using that in a manipulative kind of way. And I've done that. Like, I was, like, at the end, I was like, oh, I can relate. Like, oh, that's so bad. I can relate to that. Like, I don't think that I do it anymore. But I, like, in this instance that I've been talking about, I definitely have used my own emotions as a way to manipulate others to get what I've wanted, which sounds so shitty, but it's the truth, and it is what happened.
Well, it's not that it's not shitty, but it's also, like, something that we do as people, and I think there's way more to be said about, like, being able to acknowledge that and be like, that's a behavior that I have had or even might still have that is, like, you know, I was saying the same thing about being an earth communicator and how I'm learning recently that, like, something I do that can be very good is, you know, detach myself a little bit emotionally, so that when we're having like an emotional or a conversation, I'll be very, like, pragmatic, very factual. But I also definitely can remove myself emotionally. And when the conversation is more emotionally driven, if it's like a breakup or, you know, a more emotionally driven talk, it can be a little manipulative to be like, well, I'm looking at this very factually. I'm looking at this very pragmatically. And that's not good. Yeah. And that's something else I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, and I still feel like sometimes I have this temptation to, like, be like, oh, but if I bring this up, like, this person would, like, probably do what I wanted, which sounds so bad, but I'm recognizing that I've done this, and that I still have this kind of habit sometimes to think in that way, because I was stuck in this pattern of, like, kind of being manipulative because it was helping me, because I was at such a low, and so I, like, picked up kind of these behaviors for a while. It was like, oh, well, let me just tell them about how shitty my life has been, and this is my excuse, and, like, maybe they'll understand, type of a thing. And, like, it sucks to admit that out loud, like, on a podcast that who knows how many people one day might hear.
Yeah.
But it is the truth, and it is what I was doing, and I definitely still recognize it, but it's all about growth, because I don't want to be that person. Like, I don't want to come off that way. I don't want to manipulate people emotionally because I'm emotionally upset, but I fell into this pattern of thinking it was easier to get what I wanted in an emotionally manipulative way than to recognize that I was really hurting, and that I just, like, if I didn't manipulate, these people that I was trying to manipulate emotionally to get what I wanted would have probably helped me anyway. Like, if I just explained, like, hey, I'm really struggling. like I need somebody, rather than me being like, well, I'm really upset and I don't want to be alone today, and like saying these like keywords that I would know get someone to be like, okay, well, I'm on my way, I'll come over and hang out, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
and that's like more of a simplified way of doing it, because I've definitely been, especially to that one friend, very manipulative. But I just think it's, again, about growth. Like, it's all about recognizing these things and kind of moving forward from them, because
absolutely,
I don't, I was stuck in that pattern, and I definitely wouldn't blame anybody who knew me at that time if they were to call me manipulative, or if they were to tell people that I was a toxic person or whatever, because at that time I was 110% being that way. And
hey, listen, 100%, absolutely. But like glass houses,
yeah,
what's the saying? Like, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I think it's extremely telling that you are able to acknowledge those shortcomings, and because, like, how else do you grow past them? Like, what's the other option? Like, pretend that you haven't been a toxic person, pretend that I'm not going to pretend that I haven't been a toxic person, because then that, to me, just shows a real lack of growth.
And I think there's a couple of different categories of like this type of toxicity as well, because I think there's, and again, not an excuse for anybody's behavior when they are acting this way, but like there's definitely people who are going through something and they become toxic because it's a hard thing for them to deal with, like me, right? And I'm like really struggling to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm just gonna like put this out into the world because this is easier for me to deal with than to like do it. But then there's also the people who actually have like some form of mental illness and aren't actually aware of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you should allow that behavior, and not that that's an excuse, but I think there's definitely... Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Hold on. Okay, no, I'm not.
Oh.
Okay, maybe I am.
Oh.
I'm okay.
Look up at the light. Look up at the light.
I am looking right at this ring light.
Look right at
like I have people in my life who I know are like most likely diagnosable like narcissists, and does that fall back to like there's some of it that is created in trauma, but there's some of it that's also been created just because there's some mental illness there and they don't recognize their own issues. However, it's my responsibility to protect myself and set healthy boundaries to keep these people at a distance, even if I love them and even if I care about them, so that I'm not getting hurt. So again, not excusing the behavior, but being aware of the behavior, and if it's something you can't get away from, how do you protect yourself from it? Right. And then there's one more category, and some people are just straight up assholes. And those people
suck. Yeah.
Fuck them.
Get them out of your life.
Just leave. So again, it's a tricky thing because I feel like not all the time, like, you can just be like, oh, this is what this person is going through. And again, not that should be an excuse, like, for that person to treat you some type of way, and definitely don't stay if someone's treating you that way, but it does help to be able to sometimes recognize that maybe this person is just, like, struggling, and that they don't mean it the way that it's being, like, put off, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I want to keep talking to that because I completely agree. It's all about awareness, and it's all about so I guess the first step in terms of like yourself and your own habits is to make sure not to ask, do I have anything to improve, but rather, what do I have to improve?
Right.
And being, and that's the other thing, is it's all about balance too, right? Because yes, I think it's really positive and telling in a positive way to be able to acknowledge, oh, I've had these patterns and these are not good and these are things I'm trying to work on. However, too much of like beating yourself down leads to, I think, from what I've seen, leads to people labeling themselves as, I am a toxic person. Or even if they're not doing that, being a little manipulative and asking for validation of like, oh yeah, I used to be super, super manipulative. Wasn't that so bad compared to me now? And it's tricky. It's really, really tough. And it all comes down to really knowing yourself. And you know, I can't really give great advice on like how to do this, but trying to work on understanding your own behaviors, how they might affect others, and also your own emotional stability and how others' behaviors might affect you. And knowing when it's the time to separate yourself because you're going to go through something and you just need to go through it alone. Because, you know, what this all comes down to is like people's brains sometimes just work a certain way. Mm-hmm. But I think personally, if you know your brain works a certain way and you can't stop it from working that way, but you can stop other people from being affected by it, that to me is extremely telling of a non-manipulative person, of a non-toxic, or, you know, of right. Someone actively fighting their toxic behaviors, which is inherently terrific and commendable.
Yeah.
But just because I said, you know, A, knowing that when, like, you might have to separate yourself, B, holding someone else accountable for separating themselves, which is a similar thing, or C, knowing that someone might be going through something, but you have, I think we've talked about having the spoons before on the podcast, like the amount of, you know, the amount of energy that you have, the mental, like, energy you have to do something, saying, like, oh, I have the spoons for that. You only have so many spoons, and what I have are the spoons to help this person going through something right now. And knowing, being secure enough, knowing that, like, they may have some manipulative tendencies, but I am aware and can handle that, and that's not in a... It's so hard to say because so it's not. It's okay if you can't. Also,
yes, and there's I think so I think I'm going to. My point that I was going to bring up is going to back up what you're trying to say, because what I've learned, I have learned. Let me tell you, having a couple therapists is just a whole whirlwind of like learning a bunch of shit. One of the things I've learned a lot about myself in the past year, is how much I take on from other people, because I'm someone who cares with my entire being and my entire, like, I care wholeheartedly about people. Mm-hmm. Like, if you were to tell me you had a bad day, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. What's going on? Like, tell me all your problems.
Yeah.
But then putting myself, like, on the back burner, and the way I'm tying this back into, like, toxicity is just a reminder that I think it goes back to my point earlier that I said, like, I do have some toxic people who are like diagnosable narcissists in my life. Again, it's your job to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you need to learn if you're the person on the other side of this where you're in a toxic relationship, and I mean, like, I'm not talking about abusive relationships. That's a whole nother episode I could go on for hours about. Yeah. But if it's just a toxic relationship where, honestly, toxic relationships are emotionally abusive at times. So, like, first of all, if it's something you need to get out of, you need to get out of. If it's something you can't get out of, like, or I don't want to say can't get out of, because even if it's family, you can get out of it. Like, you don't need to talk to your uncle if he's an asshole, you know what I mean? Or like, you know, I know that's difficult, and I know that's like really hard to do, and I'm not saying like just do it if that's not what you want, but like I've realized with some of my family members that like I still want a relationship with them. So then the question is, how do I do this in a way that's healthy for me and that has boundaries, and how do I keep those boundaries so that I'm okay? Because me constantly like introducing myself to that kind of toxicity and allowing it in my life is just no bueno. Like, not good at all for me and my mental health and my well-being and my future goals and what I want. So it's also, as much as it's like, be compassionate for people and care for these people that you love, also be able to take care of yourself, because at the end of the day, it's all you. Like, you're all you got. And you're going to beat yourself down and burn yourself out faster than anything if you allow people to take advantage of you. And quickly, I want to give an example of a friendship that I've had to set like boundaries with, because again, I care for this person, and I also understand that this person has some like mental health things going on. And I know that this isn't this person's typical behavior, but there's a lot going on right now, and it's a lot for me. I've had to teach myself that it's okay for me to give myself that break from that person. And it's okay to not answer the phone at 10 o'clock at night. It's okay that if me setting boundaries upsets the other person, so what? The other person you're setting boundaries with doesn't have to like your boundaries. They're your boundaries. You're taking care of you. Mm-hmm. And I can't stress that enough, because I unfortunately have had a lot of toxic relationships in my life, and I've had to learn how to do that, where now at 9 o'clock p.m., my phone goes on like a focus mode, which is my sleep mode, even though I don't fall asleep till 3 o'clock in the morning. But I'm not answering your call after 9 p.m. unless you're on my emergency contact list, or like I'll get your notification.
Or me.
Right, or if you're John, because John takes up my whole world, so, you know.
No, 9:15 every night, I call Emily for roughly 2 hours.
Watch him and then I just watch him eat, like, bowls of cereal
while I just complain about my day, and then Emily starts to talk about her day, and I just go, oh, I don't really want to get into that. Exactly. And then I hang up abruptly.
It took me a while to do that. Like, instead I would be answering my phone at 11 o'clock at night when it's like, no, I need to go to bed. And I don't have the wherewithal, or the spoons, as John says, to take on your stuff at the end of the day sometimes. And that's okay, because I've had a rough day and I have a lot going on and I need to go to bed. Yeah. And if I answer you past 9 p.m., it's because I want to answer you past 9 p.m. Yeah. And if I don't answer you past 9 p.m., it's because I don't want to answer you past 9 p.m. And that's okay. And I'm allowed to set that boundary with absolutely everybody. And honestly, if it's an emergency, I'll know if it's an emergency. Because it's not like I'm not on my phone at night. But, like, I need to be able to set that boundary so that at the end of the night, I'm not overwhelming myself with other people's shit before I go to bed. Because otherwise, I'd be up all night talking to this one person who tries to call me at 9 p.m. almost every day. So, I mean, now it's not that bad anymore. But...
No, but
at one point it was literally nightly, and I was like, I can't do this.
It's
like,
too much.
Again, I care, and I want you to be okay, and I want you to be healthy, and I want, again, everything to be okay. But there's a point where this isn't good for me anymore, and I need to set that boundary. So, take care of yourself first.
You have to take care of yourself if
you have these people in your life.
And it's so hard to give that advice, because it's so hard to say, like, you have to take care of yourself, because, you know I've gone through that, where I'm like, I know I have to take care of myself, but what happens when taking care of myself is neglecting someone else's needs? And that's when it comes down to the spoons that you may have, the frequency with which it happens. I'm not saying, like, if someone reaches out to you at 9 p.m. and is like, I've literally never reached out to you, but I really, really need help in this moment,
right.
and you're in a place where you can do that, you don't have to stick to your boundary if you're doing okay. It's so case by case.
Right. But and I do want to say too that I have, like, even recently answered my phone past 9 p.m. for this one person, because I was in a place where I could do that. So I just wanted to make the point of, like, I've had to learn how to be able to say no past a certain point to protect myself.
Because you have to be able to set that boundary so that it's your decision. Because whether or not you feel like you're capable of giving in to of handling that, like, if it's a repeated thing, it's going to wear down on you. And whether you like it or not, it's something that, like, when your mental health starts to suffer from someone else's behavior, whether or not you like it, at least subconsciously and then eventually consciously, you're going to start resenting them, and it's going to really affect your relationship, and it might bring you to start doing more toxic things and saying like, well, but it's fair because they always do this to me. And that's the whole cycle. And so I think what it really comes, the classic saying of treat others the way you want to be treated, the golden rule, absolutely, of course. But you know what else? Hold other people accountable to treating you the way you treat them.
Yes.
If you know that if a friend would reach out to you and say, hey, I'm really sorry, but I need to set this boundary, I can't be on my phone after 9 o'clock, how would that make you feel? Would you understand that? I hope you would understand that. If you would understand that, then it's completely okay for you to set that boundary. You know,
Yes.
if a friend's saying, I'm so sorry, but I am having a bad mental health day and I can't do this thing, you would understand that.
Yeah.
So hold other people to the same standard that you hold yourself to,
Right.
because that's the compromise that goes into any relationship.
Absolutely. And I think the last thing I kind of want to point out before we wrap up is semi unrelated, but I'm trying to relate it to it because I think it like applies, is I recently, there's this influencer that I follow on Instagram, and he took like a mental health break from social media. And obviously people on the internet, when you're an influencer, are brutal. And he's really big into like dieting and making sure that he's like he's taking care of himself in a really good way. So like one of the things he posted the other day that I thought was a really interesting perspective, that I do think it relates to this, is someone said to him, because he was like, oh, I really wish I could have this pizza, but I'm not going to do it. And someone was like, oh, well, you know, it's okay to slip up every now and then. And his response to that was, no. For me, it's not, because that's not my goal. So I'm not going to allow myself to slip up. I don't want to make an excuse because I'm having a moment of weakness, which I'm not preaching that for everybody, because if you slip up on a diet, no one cares.
That's a very personal goal. That's a
right, and that's what I'm trying to bring back to like toxicity, right? Like at the end of the day, someone might be like, "Oh, well, it's okay to like let these people in, or it's okay to do this every now and then."
Yeah, I get that all the time.
Yeah, it's like, well, for me, it's not. And for me, I believe in this as X, Y, and Z. And that's fine for you to have your own viewpoint on that. You don't have to agree with someone else just because they feel some type of way about some situation. So
yeah, as long as what you are preaching is for your personal goals.
Absolutely.
If you're preaching it's not okay to slip up for other people's goals.
Yes. And he even said,
toxic. Don't do that.
He even said in his post, he's like, for me, I find it that when I slip up and I allow myself that compassion, for me, it's me making an excuse because I know myself. Like, I know that I am making an excuse because I had a moment of weakness and I gave into it. But again, that's for him. And for me, if I were dieting, I wouldn't be taking... He's also like a bodybuilder. So like, he's like really, like not really a bodybuilder, but he's really big on like just making sure he feels good, because for him, food, like healthy food and healthy like lifestyle makes him and his mental health feel good. So he knows his own boundaries and what he needs, and he's able to communicate that to people. But I just thought it was kind of like really relevant to this, because again, if it's your own personal feeling towards something and it's valid and it's what you need for you, then preach it, do what you need to do to protect yourself. So
that's great.
Yeah, so I thought that was really insightful, and I actually, when I read his little story about that, because again, at first I was kind of like, well, it is okay to slip up, but then I thought to myself, well, for him, if that's what he's putting forward, then that's fine, because he's not saying you can't slip up, you're making excuses if you slip up, take care of yourself. Like, he's saying, no, I need to take care of myself because I know myself. Yeah. So I think that applies to a lot of different things in life. So I actually thought about how when we were going to record this episode, how I was going to bring that up, because I was like, that's like a really good way to like kind of like wrap it all up. Like, do what you got to do for you, recognize what's best for you, and just take care of yourself at the end of the day, you know, and set boundaries. Like, if someone in your life is hard, or you can't necessarily get rid of them in a sense because they are family and there's just like a complicated relationship there, like learn how to create boundaries that protect you from their toxicity and their issues, and just kind of like focus on your well-being.
So what did we learn?
So, you know what we learned?
What's the first thing? I couldn't possibly guess.
Pet.
Uh-huh.
Some.
Oh.
Dogs.
Oh, I love that piece of advice. Pet some dogs, everyone.
Second is, if there's some red flags and people are acting a little toxic, maybe take a step back and evaluate why they might be. And if this is a pattern, maybe run the other way, or maybe set some boundaries. Yeah. Or just like figure out what's going on within you and within the other person if you can, and that's possible. But take care of you first. I think that's the most important thing.
You got to recognize how you're feeling, because if you're not in a good mental health place, it's going to affect other people. So be selfish and look out for yourself so that you can take care of other people.
Absolutely. And then my rule number 3 is just to know that we love you.
Oh, man. We love you so much. It's crazy. It's insane. It's like, we just love you. You're doing a great job.
So, with that being said, thank you for listening, everybody. And we will see you next time on...
And we'll see.
There it is. Bye, everyone. Cool. Okay, are we happy?